Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Christ is risen.
Truly is risen.
It's the last time on a Sunday that we say this. We'll say it again this week. There'll be, well, I don't know if we will. We'll have the leave taking of Pascha on Wednesday. I don't know if Father Nicholas is celebrating because I'm going to be gone for the week. But I'll be celebrating liturgy on Thursday for Ascension, which you should too. And also then on Sunday down in Corpus Christi, then I'll be back. So Father Nicholas will do the services. But I'll still be praying, even though I'm on vacation. Being on vacation doesn't mean that you don't pray. You still pray. That's the most important thing. Today we have such a beautiful story. I love this story. It's kind of complicated. It has a complicated dialogue in it. There's a lot of dialogues in St. John's Gospel. They're beautiful. They're very beautiful. And they show these three things that we have to be saved. Now, a lot of times the fathers will talk about, especially the Alpine elders, all the time, they talk about patience and humility. You can win your soul with patience and humility. Every single one of us. We have trouble with humility. We're proud. We don't like the way things happen to us. We think, well, you know, I'm the Lord of my universe. I shouldn't have this happen to me. Well, yeah, you should. Because you need to have these things happen to you. So we have to be patient, absolutely. But if we're not humble, we won't be patient. If we're not patient, we won't be humble. But there's another ingredient. There's another ingredient that will help us to be saved that is so important. And it really comes out here. I love the courage of this blind man. And his sense of humor, too, by the way. Very courageous. He reminds me a little bit about Elijah. Remember when Elijah had sort of a grudge match, right? With Jezebel. And whose God is the biggest? Whose God is the greatest? So we'll have this big sacrifice, and the prophets of Baal can go ahead and do whatever they do, cut themselves and scream and rant and rave. And, of course, the sacrifice was not consumed. And then, of course, he started to talk to them as that's happening, like, well, maybe you should talk louder because your God might be asleep or he might have gone away. I love his sense of humor. This is with soldiers that could have cut him up. But he wasn't afraid. He was afraid later, but not at that point because God filled him with his Spirit. This blind man has that kind of spunk. I think, if I can be a little not like the fathers, I think you need spunk to be saved. You need to have energy in you. You need to have a purpose and be fulfilling that purpose and be not giving up. So many times things happen that bring us down. And we all fall prey to despondency. And we all fall prey to cowardice, because cowardice is a component of despondency. Just think about children when they're in a pickle. They think, my daddy can save me. That's it. My daddy's going to help me. My mommy's going to help me. They have no fear. But we don't think like that, do we? We still have all these thoughts, and we have so much anxiety. So much anxiety. And that's a form of cowardice. We cannot be cowards if we're saved. You have to have courage to be saved, and with courage, humility, and patience. And we see all of these in this blind man. So let's look at sort of in microcosm what happens in the spiritual life. So there's an encounter with Christ. We all have it, whether you're Orthodox or not. Some of you have declared to me just recently that you want to become Orthodox. Glory be to God. Whether you're inquiring, whether you're Orthodox from the time you were baptized as a baby or maybe later on in life, all of us have an encounter with Christ. And with that encounter comes some kind of healing. Maybe we feel a little bit better about something. Maybe something literally physically is healed. Maybe a psychological, a spiritual problem. Something where we have some warmth in our heart. Happens to anybody. Doesn't have to be. You don't have to be Orthodox to have it happen. You have an encounter with Christ and you have some healing. But then comes conflict. Because there always is conflict after the healing. Because Satan hates us. And he's going to put conflicts in our path constantly. Well, we have to react to those conflicts with courage, with patience, with humility. We have to stick to it. And then we have another encounter with Christ with even greater healing. That's basically describing all of our lives right now. That's basically your life. Encounter with Christ, some healing, conflicts that are probably directly related to that healing, that are going to test you. And if you're patient, if you're humble, if you have courage, then you encounter Christ again with more healing. That's basically what's happening to all of us. Or perhaps it's not happening to some of you. That's because you're deficient in one of those three things. Perhaps you're not very patient. Perhaps you're not very humble. Perhaps you don't have much courage. By the way, people who are prideful don't have courage. Because we know that we're not that reliable. Everybody knows that. Even if a person acts like they're all that, we know that we're not all that. We know that we're pretty weak. So if you depend on yourself, you're depending on someone who's inadequate. So of course you wouldn't have courage. But if you depend on God, you have courage. So these three virtues, sort of like a holy trinity of virtues, are necessary for salvation, and we'll see it in the blind man. So let's go through his story, just look at a few little points. I mean, it's such a long dialogue, we could spend a long time speaking about it. And I probably will speak a little longer than you want me to, but we can't speak for hours on it. So let's just go to a few points about it. So Jesus Christ is passing by and sees a man blind from birth. And his disciples ask, who did sin? This man or his parents, that he was born blind? I submit to you that that's a stupid question. Now, Jesus answers the question, and more than the question, because he always does that. Jesus will answer stupid questions, including your stupid questions. He'll answer them. He'll answer them with more than the question. Sometimes not even the question, just what you really need to know. But I would say this is a very sinful question to ask, because everything happens under the providence of God. Now, this is not Jesus' answer, but it's contained within it. Everything happens under the providence of God. Who are we to question why this happens or that happens? Well, the things you have control over, try to control them as best you can. You can control your mouth. You can control your tongue. You can control your body and your labors. You can't control anybody else. If anybody has a 2-year-old, you can't control him. You can't control anybody. Because we're all 2-year-olds inside, basically. So why ask this question? Too many of us ask this question. Why did this happen? Why me? Why her? Why? Why are we asking these questions? These are questions from lack of faith. We shouldn't have idly curious questions. You don't need to know why you got sick. You just need to know that you should bear your illness with courage and with patience and with humility. And then in the next life, you'll have no sickness, no sorrow, no sighing. And I guarantee you, you'll never ask why in heaven. Ever. Ever. We ask why on the earth. That's a temporary question. So the Lord does answer that question. And says, well, it's neither that his parents sinned or he sinned, but it's so that the glory of God would be manifest. Then he goes on to say something that they didn't ask, but he answers their question really further, the kind of question they should have asked. So he says that I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. So he takes the opportunity to say to them, basically, whatever it is with this man, God knows and God disposes. But you had best work. Because if you don't work, it doesn't matter what you know or what you don't know. Because there is only so much time to work. And when the night comes, that is death, there is no time anymore to work. So this is the time to work while it is light, while it is day, while you are alive. After your death, you cannot work. Perhaps some will work for you. That's why we pray for the dead. But you can't work anymore. Now, perhaps, if you are among the blessed, then when you hear the prayers of your loved ones for you, you will pray for them. That'll be work. But that'll be a very easy labor. Indeed, the yoke will be very easy at that time. It'll be a pleasure to work in that blessed state. Right now it's hard to work, isn't it? It's hard to say our prayers. It's hard to remember to commemorate everybody and stuff like that. It's difficult. But that's where patience comes in. Patience includes endurance, you know. It includes doing stuff, not just sitting around. Patience is not passive, by no means. There is nothing in the Christian life, nothing in the Christian life that is passive. Not one thing is passive. If you don't do something, it's because you should choose not to do it for good reasons. And if you do something, it's because you should choose to do it for good reasons. Never are we passive, ever. Christianity is not passive. A courageous man is not passive ever. It doesn't mean he always acts, but he chooses not to act or chooses to act. Don't forget that. We're too passive. We have a life now where we can be very passive. We can just use our thumbs all day long and do nothing whatsoever except rot our brains and just overload them with neurotransmitters, dopamine, so that we become dopes. And we're passive. And so few of us are in any kind of physical condition because we're passive. We have a passive society. And that passivity, that physical passivity, and that mental passivity of looking at the phone and watching the TV and binging some stupid movie or a group of some show or whatever, that's passivity. And what it does is it just makes you just a blob. You don't want to be a blob. You want to be alive. You want to be active. And we can see this activity in this blind man that is just so refreshing to see. By the way, it's kind of the same story as Thomas, as the Samaritan woman, as the myrrh-bearing women. It's the same story as the paralytic. There was work involved for all of those, and there was a gradual process of enlightenment. There was an encounter with Christ, and then there was conflict, and then there was enduring the conflict with patience and with courage, with humility, with activity, not with passivity, no passivity. And then there was a further encounter with Christ and further healing. All these stories are the same. They all have those same ingredients. In fact, really, every encounter in healing has those ingredients, except the one who encounters Christ and is healed, and then he doesn't do anything. We're told about that situation where the demons come out of a man, but then he doesn't do anything, and then more demons come back and inhabit the man. So that actually can happen because of passivity, indifference. So now he starts to heal the man, and there's all kinds of symbolism and such about making clay with his spittle and such, and those are good things to understand. But I want to concentrate on other things because there's only so much time. So one thing that is of great interest, I think, the man didn't have eyeballs. Not only did the Lord heal him so that he could see, he created eyeballs for him. He didn't have eyeballs. There is a condition such as that. Mother Matrona of Moscow had that condition. She did not have eyeballs. So he, in essence, made eyeballs for him. He kind of made a ball of clay, pushed it into his eye, mud streaming down his face, and then told him, go wash in the pool of Siloam. Perhaps he might have said, well, thanks a lot. I have mud on my face, and now I have to walk, stumble, and people are going to make fun of me, as if I don't look funny enough without eyeballs. Now I've got mud eyes in my face and mud streaming down my face. But he was obedient. The Lord knew he'd be obedient. So he went there, and of course he was immediately cleansed. His eyes grew, and he could see. Now there were people that were saying, is this him? I don't know. It looks like him. Well, yeah, it looks like him, but it looks like him with eyeballs, so he looks a whole lot different. That's why people were confused. They were genuinely, some of them, really confused. Because this is a man with eyes. The man they knew didn't have eyes. He had sunken eye sockets. But then he said, I am he. I'm the one who was healed. I am the one who didn't have eyes, and now my eyes are open. Now this happened on the day of the Sabbath. And the Jews had all kinds of rules. Some of them were godly rules because they were from the commandments. They were from Leviticus and such. and the other books of the Torah. But a lot of them were just made up stuff by people that wanted to have power. And one of their ideas was, not only should you not do any work on the Sabbath, which was forbidden according to the law, and they defined work in certain ways, but they defined work as even healing on the Sabbath. What an amazing thing. The Lord showed their hypocrisy at one point, where he said, if you have an ox or an ass and you lead them out, do you lead them out to water on the Sabbath? Of course you do. What if someone, I think it was a sheep, falls into a pit? What are you going to do? Well, of course you're going to take your sheep out. You're not going to let your sheep die on the Sabbath. Well, of course it's good to do good on the Sabbath. The Sabbath is to honor God. And of course good should be done on the Sabbath. There shouldn't even be a question. But it was a question because there were people who hated Jesus because he was different than them. There were people who loved Jesus because he was different, because he spoke like no other man spake. But there are people that hated him because of that, because they wanted to have control over people, and they didn't speak like Jesus spake. They didn't act like he acted. They didn't have that kind of power, charisma that he had. And people loved him for that, but they hated him. So they would make up things in order to come with some accusation against him, that he would heal on the Sabbath day because it's forbidden. We see that nowadays. We see that in our so-called inclusive society, which means exclude everybody that doesn't believe, just like you. They can be different ethnicity than you. They can look different than you. They can have weirder whatever than you. As long as they think like you, they're included. But if they don't think like you, then they're not included. And what are the things that the people that exclude, what kinds of things do they say? They say a person who's not like them in those ways is hateful, bigoted, phobic, etc. That's exactly like the Jews, the ruling elite, saying it's not lawful to heal on the Sabbath day. It's always lawful to heal on the Sabbath day. It's always lawful to believe the truth. It's always lawful to follow the commandments. Those that don't follow the commandments, may God help them. Pray for them. But you, not following after them, does not make you evil. It makes them evil. Your eye is good and their eye is evil. But here, Jesus healed. His eye was good and theirs was evil. They saw something that was good and they made it into something bad for their own political purposes. Don't fall into this trap. We saw that in the pandemic over and over again. We saw people that should know better, that were wearing clerical robes, saying horrendous things and judgmental things about those that did not agree with them. That's horrendous and terrible. That is exactly this same thing that the Jews did. Now we are to love everyone, but we are not to follow everyone. We're not to do what everyone does or believe that what everyone does is good. We know what's good, we know what's right. So you better be doing that. And you better be praying for the people that don't do that. But don't fall into the peer pressure. That's where people don't have courage. They're afraid. They're afraid to buck the trend. Well, there's going to be a lot of bucking of the trend in the future. We've had our little dress rehearsal. Eventually we're going to get the play. I think most of you probably believe me. Some of you might think, oh, he's being reactionary or something, etc. Okay. Even if you think I'm being reactionary, and I don't think I am, I think I'm being very discreet about describing what's going to happen. If you don't have courage in this life, you're just going to be washed over. Just going to wash over. Those of us who are older than, I'd say, 30, we know a day when there were things that were just not spoken about. There were things that were just wrong. They were illegal, or they were just not allowed. Certainly we weren't going to allow our children to be taught these things. Now, the craziest things are done in the name of God. A false God, an idol God. And many people are just accepting it. Most of the mainline so-called Christian denominations, they're just rolling with it. And so many Orthodox Christians, if you see statistics, you'll see that Orthodox Christians are about as pro-choice as the rest of the country. God forgive them for that. Can you imagine? Because they have bought the line that, we have to be accepting, and we have to be this, and we have to be that. You don't want to be hateful, and da-da-da-da-da. When actually, now they're accepting murder. Pretty much. There's not much of a statistical difference between Orthodox Christians and the rest of the country for things like abortion. And it's getting to be that way for all the other stuff with all the alphabets. That's because they don't know the faith, or if they do know something about the faith, they don't have courage to walk the faith. It's not going to be any easier. Day by day, it's going to get harder. In your work, you're going to be pressured more and more, and in your daily life, you're going to be pressured more and more. Eventually, two people are going to walk in my church and expect to be married. And I'm going to say, I can't do that. And they're going to say, well, that's not legal. I'm going to say, go to Canada, it's legal there. Or they're going to say, I don't like the cold weather, I want to stay here. It's going to be trouble for me. I've joked to my wife, I suppose it's not really absolutely accurate because probably it would be a federal crime. And I've been in state prisons 1,000 times. I made 1,000 prison trips probably. That at least I'll know the layout. At least I'll know my way around. Because I really think that eventually it's very likely that priests that have any courage at all are going to be put in prison. That's what happened in Russia, didn't it? So it happened in Romania, etc. So eventually it's probably going to happen to me. Now maybe I'm 65. I think I'll probably live long enough for it to happen because I'm pretty healthy. I think it's going to happen in our generation. We have to have courage. But where are you going to get that courage? Where are you going to have that courage? You have that courage by the way you live. First of all, you act courageously when you can. When you can't act courageously, well, you can't be courageous when you can't be courageous. I mean, it sounds like, sort of a circular reasoning. Of course, you can't do what you can't do. But the things you can do, you better do them. And many times, people give up the smallest details of their life because it's easier for them. It's easier. I'm at a business meal. I'm not going to make the sign of the cross because I don't want to offend anybody or whatever. Well, that's stupid. You're offending God. You want to offend God? I mean, God doesn't give you a paycheck, but He gives you more than that. So people give up so much, so easily, little things, and then it just gets to the point where they give up more and more and more. So you have to live courageously. Now, we haven't even gotten to his dialogue yet, have we? Let's get to that, because it's really exciting. So, they bring him to the Pharisees, who was blind, and the Pharisees ask how he received his sight. Well, that's another stupid question. How did you receive your sight? You were a man without eyes, a man that we definitely know about, because we have spies that watch him all the time. Put clay in your eyes, and now you see. We know exactly how you gained your sight. But they had to ask for the point of the charade. Because they didn't want to accept that Jesus healed the man. And so they say, this man's not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. We've already discussed that lie. Over and over, that lie that we're not of God because we don't agree with some insane part of popular culture. Well, we don't agree with those things, and we are not liars. We are truth tellers. We're living according to the truth. Have the courage to stand up for that truth. But they're saying this man can't be of God because he healed on the Sabbath day. But others are saying, well, how can this be? I mean, he did a miracle. How can a sinner do miracles? So there's this division, even among the Pharisees. And some of the Pharisees were good. There was Nicodemus. There was Joseph. There was Gamaliel. They were followers of Christ, although quietly. And there were others among them too. So the Jews didn't believe, but they wanted to bring his parents. So they bring his parents. And, well, first of all, I I have to say one more thing before they brought his parents. They ask him, what do you say of him? They're hoping that they can kind of, because they're obviously frowning at him and they're being aggressive towards him, they're hoping that he'll back down. What do you say of him? Do you dare to say anything good about him? So what does he say? He says he's a prophet. Now, last week, I asked the children, I was giving a sermon. When someone called him a prophet, the Samaritan woman, when someone called him a prophet, is that right? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much right is it? 1 is not right at all. 10 is completely, absolutely right. Well, we decided it was a 5. Because yes, he is a prophet, but he's more than a prophet. To say Jesus is a prophet is really not saying much about him, is it? He's a prophet. He's the greatest of the prophets. He's a king, the greatest of the kings. He's a high priest, the greatest of the priests. And he's God and man. So he's all those things. Just to say he's a prophet, that's a beginning. So see, the man had an encounter with Christ. He obeyed him. He had struggles, tribulations, difficulties. It wasn't easy to get to the pool. Then he's getting accosted because he's now able to see. People should be saying, glory be to God. Where is this man? We should talk to him. Please teach us more, like the Samaritans did when St. Fontigny went to them. But they didn't do that, did they? They wanted to accost this man and eventually accost Christ, or at least accost Christ through proxy by accosting this man. So the man at least says something that is, as much as he knows, he's a prophet. Now the implication is if he's a prophet, well, there were a few prophets that weren't so great. I mean, Balaam, he had his ups and downs. But for the most part, the prophets were holy, righteous men. So the idea that he's a prophet means he's righteous. So he says that, and that gets the Jews really mad. They were grinding their teeth at this point. That is, the ruling Jews. So then they want to get his parents to see and try to make his parents kowtow. And they did get his parents to basically give it up. They threw their son under the bus. They said, yes, this is our son, but he's of age. You let him speak. Because they didn't want to say anything where they were going to get thrown out of the synagogue. They had no courage whatsoever. So the man has to speak on his own. And what does he say? They say, give God the praise. That is the ruling Pharisees. Dare to say, give God the praise. Could you imagine? People who are trying to blaspheme God are saying, give God the praise. Give God the praise. We know this man is a sinner. Well, really? So he answered and said, I love his humor here, because I consider this to be an ironic statement. Whether he be a sinner or not, I don't know. But one thing I know, whereas I was blind, now I see. That was a very witty comeback, wasn't it? Of course he's not a sinner. And then he goes on and embellishes his response to show that he knows that the man is not a sinner. Then they say to him again, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? They knew how that happened. They had people that probably told them how that happened because they always had eyes on him. Except their eyes could not see. Their eyes were blind. So then he says, I told you already and you did not hear. Now, that's generally not the way you speak to your superiors. You're not going to go to a king, and you're not going to be smart-alecky to him like that. But this man is starting to understand. By degrees, he's starting to get understanding. Wait a minute. If they hate this man so much, there's something to this. This man healed me. This man was good and gentle to me and kind to me. Certainly must be a great man, at least a prophet, and they hate him. So the more they hate him, the more he begins to love him. There's this enlightenment happening by degrees. But it's because he's reacting, because he stands up and takes their full onslaught. So what does he say to them? He says, I've told you already, you did not hear. Would you like to hear it again? You don't imagine how angry they would have been when he said that. He knew the response. He knew that it was about to get him kicked out of the synagogue. A synagogue he hadn't even been in because, of course, he was considered cursed because he was blind. So he got to have a 20 minutes membership in the synagogue. And then they revile him. And they said, thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. Can you imagine how they're putting their chest out when they say that? That reminds me of the Pharisee and the publican. It says that the Pharisee assumed a stance. Some of the icons have him kind of like this, like he's Columbus on the boat, or something like that, or Washington, holding the flag, And they're just full of arrogance, full of pride. Horrible pride. So, then he says, or they say, we know God spake unto Moses, but this fellow we don't know from where he is. And the man answered and said to them, why, hearing is a marvelous thing. And you know not from whence he is, and yet he hath opened my eyes. In other words, you know where he's from. Everybody knows where he's from. The fact that he opened my eyes shows we know where he's from. You just don't want to admit it. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if any man be a worshiper of God and does his will, him he heareth. Since the world began, it was not heard that any man opened the eyes of one born blind. Oh boy, they must have been absolutely steaming at this point. He knew that his days, his minutes were numbered among them. But he spoke with such courage and with such humility too. And I guess patience. Because, some people would say, you guys are crazy, and just leave. But he stood there and took their invective, and he gainsayed their invective with such spirit-filled words. So, of course, they throw him out. Now, Jesus knew that they threw him out. So he goes to him, and he says, dost thou believe in the Son of God? Here's the next encounter. The man had an encounter where his eyes were... Well, first he had an encounter where his face was just muddy. Then his eyes are created, and he's able to see. And then, of course, he has all this tribulation afterwards. Now here's the next encounter with Christ. He's stood the test. He's shown his courage, his patience, his humility. So Jesus comes to him and says, do you believe in the Son of God? Now, of course, he'd never seen Jesus. So he didn't know what he looked like. And he answered, said, who is he, Lord, that I might believe in him? And the Lord tells him, it's the one right here that's talking to you. And then he made obeisance to him. So there was that great healing, the healing of his soul now. Now he became a follower. I don't know if our holy tradition has his name. I don't remember. I've never heard his name. Perhaps we do know his name. But certainly he became a follower of Christ, a man with that much courage, with that much humility and patience. And that's what we must have too. This is our life. Encounter with Christ, and then tribulations, difficulties. A lot of those difficulties, let's be honest, they're just from us. They're not from other people. They're from the fact that we just got gunk in our heart. That's where most of our troubles come from. But then we get troubles from our environment and from all the people saying crazy things and trying to get us to believe crazy things and to admit to crazy things and all that stuff, including in the church, unfortunately. There are movements in the church that are completely despicable. And may God crush them down. There have been in the past, and there will be more in the future. And God crushed some of the ones in the past down, like Arianism and Gnosticism and all these other things. And there's a lot of stuff happening. But we just have to have courage. We have to live encountering Christ and then reacting with courage like this blind man. Maybe with a little humor, but certainly with some spunk, with some strength to our temptations. And then we'll encounter Christ again. And we'll be stronger. It's a beautiful story, isn't it? It's one of my favorite of the entire Paschal season. Christ is risen. Christos voskresie. God bless you.